Getting back together, I said, listen, one of the things I don't want is a relationship on social media. It's sort of like, you're gonna marry a boat captain, and you go, well, I don't like the water.
Hollywood loves a comeback, but it loves a train wreck even more. We've seen the red carpet smiles, the billion-dollar franchises, and the Batman jawline. But did you know that Ben Affleck was once secretly blacklisted by Hollywood's most powerful director because of a pool party gone wrong? Life gave him everything, from fame to money and talent, but it also gave him co-stars who made him miserable. And today, we aren't just listing names, we're revealing the 5 actors who forced Ben Affleck to face his demons. Jennifer Lopez. To understand the first name on this list, we have to first go back in time to 2003, when Ben Affleck wasn't just an actor, but one half of a global obsession. We know they got married years later, finding their fairy tale ending. But Jennifer Lopez, also known as J-Lo, wasn't always just Ben Affleck's sweetheart. At first glance, their collaboration in Giggly looked like a guaranteed box office hit. But the reality on set was less like a film production and more like a zoo. There was paparazzi everywhere. Photographers camped on the studio roofs with their long lenses, and helicopters hovered overhead during shoots, drowning out the dialogue with the deafening roar of rotor blades. Ben couldn't leave his trailer without a blinding flash of lights in his face. And the studio, wanting to capitalize on the couple's real-life romance, demanded reshoots to force-feed the audience the romance they saw in the tabloids. The script was rewritten on the fly, turning it into a vehicle for their relationship rather than a story that made sense. The result was a humiliating disaster of a movie. And nothing captured this better than the infamous turkey time scene, where Ben had to look the woman he loved in the eye deliver the line, "It's turkey time, gobble, gobble." In the scene, Ben is stiff, uncomfortable, and visibly aware that he is participating in a moment that will haunt him for the rest of his life. They would eventually break up in 2004, and the popular opinion was that Ben had come to hate J-Lo for ruining his career. But the truth is far more tragic. He didn't hate her for ruining his career. He hated what he became when he was with her. He hated that his craft and hard work were all reduced to him being one half of a celebrity couple. He hated the fact that he was making headlines simply because he was Mr. J-Lo. The movie, predictably, flopped. It became a cultural laughingstock, but for Ben, the nightmare wasn't over. The relationship ended, the engagement was called off, and the tabloids eventually moved on. But the consequences on Ben's career were just beginning. Ben couldn't even catch his breath before the next blow came in the form of Jersey Girl. The film was meant to be a heartfelt dramedy, but because it featured Jennifer Lopez in a supporting role, the public didn't see a movie. They saw Bennifer Part 2. And once again, the film would flop. The Giggly effect was so strong that it ruined everything it touched. The box office numbers were abysmal, and the industry, which had once hailed Ben as the next big thing, suddenly turned its back. Ben himself later looked back on this era, admitting, "It was the worst period of my professional life." Every magazine cover and every review was a reminder of his failure. There was no escape. He felt suffocated by his fame, trapped in a cage that he had unwittingly helped create. He needed to disappear and take on a role so big that he could literally hide behind a mask and shield himself from the critics who wanted to tear him apart. He thought that putting on a cape and cowl would offer him protection, but instead of safety, he would find a co-star who was a painfully blinding mirror to everything he had lost: Henry Cavill. By 2016, Ben was looking for redemption, and he thought he would find it inside the Batsuit on the set of Justice League, hoping the sheer scale of the most expensive movie ever made would dwarf his personal problems. He was wrong. The set was chaotic. The script was changing daily, as well as the directors, and the studio was breathing down everyone's neck. And right in the center of this storm stood Henry Cavill. Cavill was the ultimate golden retriever. He was enthusiastic, trained his body to perfection, memorized every line, and genuinely loved being Superman. He joked with the crew. He stayed late to sign autographs, and he was so positive that he seemed immune to the chaos around them. He was living his dream, and he wore that red cape like it was a crown. Then there was Ben. If Henry was the eager rookie, Ben was the battered veteran who had seen too much war. He wasn't just tired, he was broken. His marriage to Jennifer Garner was dissolving, and his struggle with alcoholism was resurfacing, and he hated wearing the bat suit for 14 hours a day. Every time Henry smiled, every time he bounced on the balls of his feet, ready for another take, it made Ben feel emptier. Ben would film his scenes and retreat immediately to his trailer, desperate for silence, while Henry stayed out, laughing and keeping morale up. It wasn't that Ben hated Henry, but when he looked at Henry, he saw the joy and passion he once had for acting, which had been replaced by deep exhaustion. The tension of these two polar opposites standing shoulder to shoulder kept growing until it finally spilled out of the studio and onto the world stage. And when it did, it resulted in a silence so loud it went viral. That tension finally snapped during a press junket interview that would go down in internet history. As the interviewer asked about the movie's reception, Henry Cavill jumped in immediately, excitedly talking about evolution and the future of the characters. Beside him, Ben sank into his chair, his eyes glazed over, trapped in his own head, likely replaying the nightmare of the Joss Whedon reshoots, a period he would later describe as the absolute low point of his career. The internet called him Sad Affleck and had a laugh. But, looking back, that was the face of a man who was done and drained. He later admitted that this specific experience was toxic and draining, leading him to eventually hang up the cape forever. Ultimately, Ben didn't hate Henry Cavill. He envied him. Henry represented the pure, untainted joy of filmmaking that Ben had lost. Looking at Henry was like looking at a ghost of his younger self. But while Henry made Ben feel old and hollow, the next name on this list wouldn't trigger his sadness. It would trigger his rage. Because if Henry Cavill made Ben feel like a ghost, this next co-star made him feel like a prop in someone else's comedy routine. Chris Tucker. Ben Affleck had finally hung up the cape in 2023. He was done with the superheroes, the CGI monsters, and the green screens. He was back in the director's chair for Air, a prestige drama about the legendary signing of Michael Jordan to Nike, starring Matt Damon and Chris Tucker. Ben was proving to the world, and perhaps to himself, that he was still a serious filmmaker who could make a hit movie. In late March to early April, Ben, along with the rest of the cast and crew, would begin on a press tour leading up to the movie's release. He was the boss, so he was focused because he needed this press tour to be dignified and professional. But there was one variable he couldn't control: Chris Tucker. Chris Tucker had become a deliberate wrecking ball to his patients. Tucker, who played a small but memorable role as Howard White in the film, brought his trademark energy to the press tour, treating every interview like it was a sold-out comedy show. The tension between them was obvious almost immediately. On one side, you had Ben Affleck and Matt Damon trying to talk about the directing, the 1980s setting of the movie, and how the story and script were developed. Then you had Chris Tucker, who was loud, funny, and always talking. Tucker dominated the conversations, not just answering questions, but performing. He would interrupt his co-stars, launch into long, winding stories, and crack jokes that had the room roaring with laughter. In one interview, the host directed a question specifically to the creative team, Ben and Matt Damon, about the intricacies of working with such a legendary cast. It was a question designed for the director to shine. But before Ben could even get a word out, Chris Tucker jumped in, hijacking the entire segment. He launched into a sprawling, high-energy monologue about Michael Jordan, telling stories, cracking jokes, and going on a tangent that lasted nearly 3 minutes. It had almost nothing to do with the movie they were there to promote, but the crowd loved it, laughing along with Tucker's charisma. Ben Affleck sat there, completely frozen. He stared at the floor, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on a spot of carpet, as if he were trying to laser a hole through the floorboards. He realized that he had lost control. He was the director, yet he was being reduced to a background extra in the Chris Tucker comedy hour. When Tucker finally stopped for a breath, Ben tried to steer the conversation back to the film. But Tucker instantly cracked another joke, getting more laughs, forcing Ben to put on a tight, painful smile. But the truth is, he felt disrespected by a colleague who seemed to have zero awareness of the professional setting they were in. In the end, Chris Tucker may have given Ben headaches, but eventually, Ben would be able to move on from him. The next name on this list connects to a disaster that Ben couldn't just walk away from. It was a personal betrayal that burned a bridge with the most powerful man in Hollywood and nearly ended Ben's career before it even began. Gwyneth Paltrow. To understand how bad this next disaster is, we have to rewind the clock to the late 1990s. This was the era of the golden couple. Ben Affleck and Gwyneth Paltrow weren't just dating, they were Hollywood royalty. They were young, beautiful, and sitting on top of the world. But there would eventually be trouble in paradise. Gwyneth was a true Hollywood insider. She was polished, poised, and practically raised on a film set. She was the princess of Hollywood who had just won an Oscar for Shakespeare in Love. She spoke the language of the elite fluently. Ben, on the other hand, was the outsider. He was the rough-around-the-edges kid from Boston, fresh off the success of Good Will Hunting, still wearing his heart on his sleeve and his insecurities on his face. He had the fame, but he didn't yet have the pedigree. And in this relationship, Ben wasn't just the boyfriend. He was the guy constantly trying to prove he belonged. He was fighting a silent battle with imposter syndrome, feeling the pressure to be smarter, cooler, and more impressive, just to keep up with the woman on his arm. That pressure would eventually reach its limit while they were on vacation in Spain. The couple received an invitation that most actors would kill for, a private weekend at the estate of Steven Spielberg, who was pretty much king in Hollywood. For Gwyneth, who viewed Spielberg as a mentor and a father figure, this was a relaxing weekend with family. For Ben, it was the biggest audition of his life. As they entered the gates of the massive estate, the atmosphere was intellectual and serious. This was a place for quiet conversations about art and cinema. But Ben, desperate to mask his insecurity with charisma, walked into that high-stakes environment with way too much energy. Ben was a newbie to Hollywood, and he wanted to impress the cool kids at the big table, the legends, so to speak. So he went in ready to impress. And in his desperate need to impress the most powerful man in Hollywood, Ben Affleck would make a mistake that would haunt his career for decades. While playing near the pool, in a moment of misguided childish enthusiasm, Spielberg's son made his move and pushed Ben in. Ben, caught up in the adrenaline of the moment, got back out, picked the boy up and threw him into the swimming pool. The splash could be heard across the house. When the water settled, there was silence. Ben looked around for a laugh, a smile, or anything to signal that it was all in good fun. But no one was laughing. This wasn't a Boston frat party where a pool dunk gets a cheer. This was a gathering of the industry's most dignified power players. Steven Spielberg was reportedly furious, and Gwyneth Paltrow, the polished insider, was visibly ashamed. In seconds, Ben went from being the golden boy to the embarrassing guest who didn't know how to behave. Shortly after, director Mike Binder tried to cast Ben in his film Man About Town. Binder thought Ben was perfect for the role, but Spielberg, who was producing the film, blocked it instantly. Binder later recounted the conversation, revealing the cold, hard reality of Ben's situation. Spielberg didn't mince words. He told Binder, flat out, "He threw my son in the pool and made him cry." Just like that, the door slammed shut. Ben had effectively been blacklisted from a major project. For Ben, losing the role was a gut punch. It was an obvious sign that he had blown his audition for the Inner Circle. But as he looked back on that humiliating weekend, the stinging memory wasn't just Spielberg's anger. It was Gwyneth's reaction. In that embarrassing moment, Ben looked to his partner for backup, but instead, he found himself standing alone. And that silence would fester into a resentment that lasted far longer than the relationship itself. In that agonizing moment, the invisible fault line running beneath Ben and Gwyneth's relationship cracked wide open, revealing a divide that no amount of red carpet chemistry could bridge. For a man battling deep-seated imposter syndrome, this was the biggest confirmation of his worst fears. It told him that no matter how many awards he won or how famous he became, he would always be the unruly boyfriend who wasn't quite good enough for the inner circle. He realized that for Gwyneth, maintaining the perfect image within the hierarchy was more important than him. She wasn't willing to burn social capital to save him from drowning in his own embarrassment. This abandonment forced Ben to confront a what-if scenario that likely haunted him for decades. If he hadn't been dating Gwyneth Paltrow, he never would have been at that estate in the Hamptons. He never would have been trying so desperately to impress a room full of people he didn't know, and he never would have been in the position to throw Steven Spielberg's son into a pool. In Ben's mind, the relationship didn't just break his heart, it damaged his career. For Ben, Gwyneth became the symbol of a world he was invited to, but ultimately rejected from. While she moved on effortlessly, building a lifestyle brand and maintaining her status as Hollywood royalty, Ben was left to clean up the mess. He had to navigate the industry, knowing that one of its most powerful gatekeepers, Spielberg, now viewed him as a liability. He eventually rebuilt, but as he looked around the landscape of Hollywood, trying to find his footing again, he realized there was still one rival left on the board, a man who was everything Ben tried and failed to be. A man who could walk into Spielberg's house, charm the room, make a bad movie, and still come out smelling like roses. He was the effortless charm to Ben's sweaty desperation. He was the mirror image that wouldn't go away. And he is the #1 reason Ben Affleck has spent his life looking over his shoulder. George Clooney. The name that haunts Ben Affleck is his own reflection, but perfected. It's George Clooney. To the outside world, they are friends. They are collaborators. They smile for photos and trade compliments in the press. But dig a little deeper into the psychology of Ben's career, and you realize that Clooney isn't just a peer. He is Ben's shadow. He is the doppelganger who has been running the exact same race, on the exact same track, for 30 years. but winning it with a grace that Ben has never been able to master. The similarities between these two men are eerie. It's as if they are reading from the same script. Both men reached the absolute pinnacle of Hollywood heartthrob status, crowned sexiest man alive by People magazine. Both men grew tired of just being pretty faces and pivoted to the serious, high-stakes world of directing prestige dramas. And, of course, both men made the fateful decision to don the cape and cowl, stepping into the cursed shoes of Batman. While Ben's career has been a series of violent crashes and miraculous resurrections, George's trajectory has been a smooth upward glide. Ben looks at George and sees the one thing he can't buy, earn, or direct: effortlessness. And that is the crux of the torture. It's not that George is successful, it's that his success looks so easy. When they walk into a room, the atmosphere shifts differently for each of them. George floats, Ben fights. George charms the room with a wink and a smile. Ben works the room with sweat on his brow, terrified of saying the wrong thing. They share the same titles: director, icon, and Batman. But they live in two completely different realities. And as we are about to see, nothing proves this cruel contrast more than how the world treats them when they fail. And nowhere is this injustice more visible than in how the world treated their failures in the exact same role. Both men put on the cape. Both men starred in critically panned Batman movies. But watch the difference in the fallout. When George Clooney made Batman and Robin, a film widely considered one of the worst comic book movies ever made, he didn't hide. He leaned into the absurdity. He went on talk shows and cracked jokes about the bat nipples. He charmed the press, laughed at himself, and the world laughed with him. He was forgiven instantly because his charisma acted as a shield. He is the Teflon Don of Hollywood. No matter how bad the disaster, nothing sticks to him. Then, look at Ben. When Batman vs. Superman was savaged by critics, Ben didn't have the luxury of laughing it off. He had poured his physical and emotional soul into the role, bulking up to a massive size and treating the character with extreme seriousness. And when the internet attacked, they didn't just attack the movie, they attacked him. They mocked his sadness. They turned his pain into a meme. While George was allowed to be the cool guy who made a bad movie, Ben became the sad failure who ruined a franchise. This disparity in effort is what drives the knife in deeper. George seems to glide through his career without breaking a sweat, while Ben looks like he is fighting for his life in every single frame. But the ultimate irony wasn't that Ben failed while George succeeded. It was only when Ben finally clawed his way back to the absolute summit of Hollywood that he found George waiting there too. Ben spent years rebuilding his reputation, directing hit after hit, culminating in his masterpiece, Argo. It was supposed to be his redemption, his solo victory lap. But when the envelope was opened for Best Picture, Ben didn't stand alone. He had to share the stage, the statue, and the glory with the film's producer, the one man he could never escape. On February 24th, 2013, at the Dolby Theater, Ben Affleck was standing on the biggest stage in the world. This was supposed to be the finish line. When Jack Nicholson opened the envelope and announced Argo as Best Picture, it was more than just a win. It was a career resurrection. The entire room stood up. After a decade of humiliation, giggly jokes, and career obituaries, the industry that had blacklisted him was now cheering for him. Ben rushes to the microphone, breathless and frantic. He's sporting a full beard. looking like a man who has just emerged from a bunker. He is manic, talking a mile a minute, fighting back tears. His speech isn't a polished list of thank yous. It's a desperate manifesto about survival. He tells the world, it doesn't matter how you get knocked down in life, that's going to happen. All that matters is that you gotta get up. It is a beautiful, raw moment. It is the sound of a man who believes that suffering is the only path to redemption. He is sweating, he is shaking, and he is pouring his heart out. But 3 feet to the right, standing just behind him, looking like he stepped out of a cologne commercial, is George Clooney, smiling his signature smile and clapping politely like a proud older brother. And therein lies the tragedy of Ben's biggest victory. Ben is the director, the star, and the man who bled for this movie. But George Clooney is the producer. He is the one who got the movie made. In the moment of his ultimate vindication, Ben didn't stand alone as the conqueror. He stood with the one man he could never beat. The dynamic was visually undeniable. Ben was the worker who had pulled a double shift to save the company. Clooney was the owner who just stopped by to pick up the trophy. Ben's speech was about hard work because that is the only currency he has. Clooney didn't need to give a speech about hard work because for him, success is the default setting. The irony was suffocating. Ben hadn't defeated his shadow. He had been rescued by it. He owed his comeback, his Oscar, and his restored dignity to the very man who made him feel inferior. And just when Ben thought he had finally leveled the playing field, a private message would arrive to remind him that even with a gold statue in his hand, he was still the guy who threw the kid in the pool. As Ben checked his phone that night, likely flooded with congratulations from fair-weather friends who had ignored him during the Jersey Girl years, one message stood out. It was from his close friend, director Mike Binder, the same man who had witnessed the fallout of the Spielberg blacklist firsthand. The text didn't say, "Good job," or "You deserve it." It cut straight to the core of Ben's trauma. It read, "Ben, tonight you could throw Spielberg's whole family in the pool and get away with it." Binder's text confirmed what Ben desperately needed to hear. The penance was over. The blacklist was burned. In Hollywood, power is the only detergent strong enough to wash away a sin, and by winning Best Picture, Ben had acquired absolute power. He wasn't the clumsy kid throwing teenagers in pools anymore. He was the king of the Oscars. The text proved that for years, Ben was defined by that one failure. But on this night, the definition changed. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated catharsis, a full-circle victory that proved he could outwork his mistakes. But while the pool incident was finally buried under a pile of confetti, the victory wasn't a cure-all. A trophy can fix a reputation, but it can't fix a psyche. As the adrenaline of that night faded, Ben would realize that while he had conquered Spielberg, the other ghosts we've uncovered, the humiliation of the J-Lo years, the hollow grief of the Henry Cavill envy, the disrespect of Chris Tucker, and the abandonment by Gwyneth, had left scars that no award could heal. He was a winner, yes, but he was still a survivor walking through a minefield. These weren't just feuds. They were specific triggers for his deepest insecurities: dignity, youth, authority, class, and talent. When you stack them on top of each other, it's a miracle Ben is still standing at all. Most people would have crumbled under the weight of just one of these failures. Ben carried all 5. And that leads us to the final verdict on the man behind the memes. If you look at that list, Lopez, Cavill, Tucker, Paltrow, Clooney, you begin to realize something profound about Ben Affleck. Most actors would have been crushed by just one of these disasters. A blacklist by Spielberg usually ends a career. A box office bomb like Giggly usually exiles you to straight-to-DVD purgatory. A viral humiliation like Sad Affleck usually turns you into a permanent joke. But Ben Affleck is still here. However, this resilience comes with a heavy price tag. The research suggests that Ben's greatest enemy wasn't actually Jennifer Lopez or Henry Cavill or even George Clooney. His greatest enemy has always been his own intensity. He is a man who feels too much in an industry built on pretending. He cares too deeply about the work, the reception, and the legacy, which leaves him exposed in a way that his peers never are. He survives the crash, but he never walks away without a limp. And this is why the story of Ben Affleck feels so inexhaustible. We watch him because we know that he is incapable of living a quiet, boring life. He doesn't know how to coast. As long as he is working, he is at risk of another high-stakes disaster or another miraculous comeback. Peace, it seems, is the one award he can't win. And as we look at where he stands today, it's clear that this volatile saga is far from over. And nothing proves that this saga is far from over quite like the person standing next to him today. In a plot twist that no screenwriter would dare pitch because it feels too on the nose, Ben Affleck is back with Jennifer Lopez. But we have to ask the difficult question, is this just a happy ending? Or is it proof that Ben Affleck is a man who runs towards the fire? This tells us something profound about his psychology. He is an artist who functions best when his back is against the wall, when the odds are stacked, and when the world is watching to see if he falls. He thrived on the pressure of Argo. He survived the pressure of Batman. And now he is navigating the pressure of the ultimate public reunion. He didn't choose the easy path. Instead, he chose the messy, complicated, dangerous path. So while the red carpets are calm for now, do not mistake silence for peace. Ben Affleck is a man who is constantly writing the next chapter, and we are simply watching the opening scene of the next act. But as we've seen, Ben Affleck is a man who remembers. And in Hollywood, the past is never truly dead. It is waiting in the wings, ready for its cue. Did the pool incident justify a blacklist? Let us know down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you found this video interesting, click the video on your screen right now.